This is part one of reading for Salafis. I was supposed to call it reading for skeptics, but I called it reading for Salafis in part two. So now I'm doing part one of that. So it's called reading for Salafis and not reading for skeptics, which was another video. I will probably do more videos about reading for skeptics, but today I'm doing reading for Salafis. So in part two, I discussed, and you can watch that next, or maybe you already watched it, but I discussed why Quranists are not following the Quran. If you read the verse in chapter 62, verse 2, you'll see what I mean. So I could recite it again for you. I think I made a small mistake when I was reciting the last time. والذي بعث في الأميين رسول منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة. So I discussed that it means it is who sent among the unlettered ones a messenger Muhammad from among themselves, reciting to them his verses, purifying them, and teaching them the book and al-hikmah. So clearly, when he is teaching them two separate things, the book and hikmah, we have to ask ourselves, what does al-hikmah entail? Where do we learn what this al-hikmah is? Obviously, we will learn that from the traditions, which are the Kutubu Sitta, or the hadiths, the major hadith collections, which were, written down after the Prophet ﷺ's death, but which we still have with us, and we can study those. Anything that contradicts the Quran, obviously, we don't accept. But if it doesn't contradict the Quran, and the hadith those hadiths are graded sahih or, mutawatir, there are many chains for the hadith, and, the hadith appears to be, according to scholars of hadith, the hadith appears to be sahih or correct, then you can use that hadith to understand further about Islam, specific things that we need to know, right? Because a lot of the Quran is not specific. It's, general beliefs and so on. God is one. You won't find in there all the rules for Salah. There is not one place where you can go a chapter and find everything you need to know about the pillars of Islam, for example. So that's why we need hadiths. And chapter 62, verse 2, obviously is saying that. It's telling you that there are other laws, things you need to know, details, which the Prophet ﷺ told to his companions. He taught them those things. And the hadiths are evidence of that, whether people like it or not. And so I wanted to read something else, which says, this is kind of my opinion of those Quranists, okay? So it says here, there is then the great messenger of Allah, whose moral, visible attributes, aspects of perfection, talents, virtues, noble manners, and praiseworthy deeds entitle him to occupy the innermost cells of our hearts and become the dearest target that the self yearns. 4. Those were the attributes and qualities on whose basis the Prophet wanted to build a new society, the most wonderful and the most honorable society ever known in history. On these grounds, he strove to resolve the long-standing problems and later gave mankind the chance to breathe a sigh of relief after a long, exhausting journey in dark and gloomy avenues. Such lofty morale lay at the very basis of creating a new society with integrated components immune to all fluctuations of time and powerful enough to change the whole course of humanity. Um, the Quranists are afraid that if you accept that there are Sahih hadiths, such as, telling you the age of Aisha, for example, when she married the Prophet ﷺ, and when she consummated her marriage, they are afraid that they are um, slandering the Prophet ﷺ. And so they want to reject hadiths which are to them, quote unquote, embarrassing or slandering the Prophet, and in effect, they are actually, hating on the Prophet ﷺ. They are actually doing what they are afraid of doing. Because when you have Sahih hadiths, there is a way to know that hadiths are true or not. Basically, if you don't want to believe that the Prophet married a 9-year-old, that's up to you. But you can't deny that hadiths were collected, that they were written down, they were memorized. The sunnah of the Prophet was known to the companions and to the people who followed them, and so on, until they were written down. Okay? So you can't just pretend, close your eyes or bury your head in the sand and pretend that hadiths don't exist and that they're completely worthless. You just can't do that. And so, if the Prophet ﷺ married a 9 or 10-year-old, and then you are saying that that can't be true, you're the one who's hating on the Prophet ﷺ. You're the one who's slandering him. You're having a bad, idea about him because he did marry a 9 or 10-year-old. So that is a big problem, for your faith. And the fact is that hadiths exist, and they were memorized and then later written down, just like the Quran was memorized and later written down. So it's not up to you to say which hadiths are false and which aren't, or, as someone who doesn't even study hadiths, how can you just throw them out like that? Okay, and I did make, I wrote on Twitter, I tweeted something about a week ago. So there was video by Black Dunya, and I was tweeting about my comments there, because 1 or 2 days after my tweets, I noticed that Mohammed Hijab was in Speaker's Corner talking to a Quranist, and he was saying, what's your proof that actually he said what I said in my tweets, which was that how do you know which Quran recitation is correct? Which Quran recitation are you going to use if you don't have hadiths? If you don't follow hadiths, how do you know which Quran recitation is correct from the Quran? And you can't know that, so they can't answer that question. I didn't finish watching the whole video. I was just kind of mad because I went on Twitter and ranted because, I just think it's funny that Hijab would ask that question. There were a few videos about Quranists that week. I think I saw a couple. I only watched, I think, 2 actually. Some of them I didn't even finish watching the video with Hijab. I just saw him asking that question, and I was like, wow, he just said what I said. Maybe great minds think alike, but the thing about Hijab is I don't find that he's a very original thinker. He just doesn't seem very original to me, and I do kind of think, not trying to brag, but I do like to think outside the box. Hijab uses philosophy, and that statement about, which recitation would you use, just came out of nowhere. Like, to me, it just, and it was like right after I had said that in the comments section, in videos, and then he goes the next day, like it was, I think, the next day actually, that he goes and actually asks a Quranist that question. So he went up to Quranists maybe and asked them. I don't know. So I just kind of wondering what led him to go and speak with those Quranists when he did, right?